My name is Stephanie, I am 35 years old, and for 3 years, I was married to a man named Jerry. Our marriage was arranged by a relative who believed it would help secure my family's wealth. I come from a well-off family, and my younger sister, Marilyn, and I were the only heirs to our father's estate. Marilyn and I were very different. While she was lively, charming, and outgoing, I was quiet and reserved. We lived with our father after our mother passed away. A few years later, Jerry moved in with us. He seemed like a kind man, especially toward my father, and this reassured me as I stepped into this new chapter of life. However, just before our wedding, the same relative who introduced Jerry to me gave me a warning. Be careful with Jerry, he seems too interested in your family's money. Although I took note of this, Jerry's behavior never raised any alarms at first. Over time, I started noticing small things. Jerry would casually bring up my father's finances in their conversations. He also took an unusual interest in Marilyn. One day, he even commented, "Marilyn is so different from you, isn't she?" That remark lingered in my mind, feeding my insecurities. Unlike Marilyn, who was beautiful and confident, I had always seen myself as plain and ordinary. Everything changed the day Jerry learned that I would not be inheriting my father's estate. His reaction was immediate and cruel. "You mean you're not getting the inheritance? I have no reason to stay with you. We're getting a divorce." His words confirmed what I had ignored for too long. He had never loved me. He only wanted my family's wealth. Shocked but determined, I moved forward with my life. Jerry, on the other hand, wasted no time. Soon after our divorce, he remarried, this time, to Marilyn. At first, it was painful, but as time went on, I found my strength. In the end, their greed led them to their own downfall, while I found peace in knowing I had made the right choices. If I had chosen never to marry, things might have been different, but I always knew my sister Marilyn had a reckless way of living. Our father adored her, paying for her education and even supporting her through community college. My mother, however, had been more practical. She believed Marilyn needed to work and build a stable future, but my father always gave in to Marilyn's wishes. After college, Marilyn got a job through one of my father's friends, but she quit after 8 months. "I can't showcase my talents there," she declared, as if she had already mastered everything. My mother and I were shocked by her arrogance. Still, my father found her another job. She barely lasted there as well. When my mother fell seriously ill and was hospitalized, Marilyn spent most of her time visiting but did little to help. She would sit in the hospital room, chatting or scrolling through her phone, while I managed everything, changing our mother's laundry, taking care of her needs, and arranging her medications. Eventually, our mother's health declined, and within 3 weeks of worsening symptoms, she passed away. Her death devastated our father. He was too grief-stricken to even arrange the funeral, so I took care of everything with the help of relatives. Soon after, Marilyn moved out and got a part-time job. However, her earnings weren't enough, so my father covered all her expenses, her rent, utilities, and extra spending money. While my mother had once kept her in check, my father now gave her whatever she wanted. At first, I thought it was harmless, but after I married Jerry and moved back home, I discovered something shocking. Marilyn had also been asking Jerry for money. Using her charm, she convinced him to give her cash in secret. Jerry, afraid I'd be jealous, never told me. Things took a turn when our father fell ill. While I juggled work and hospital visits, Marilyn was nowhere to be found. Instead, she called me demanding money. "I've been getting money from Dad every month, so you need to keep sending it," she insisted. I asked her how much she was receiving. Her response made my blood boil. $2,500 a month, plus rent and utilities. It was clear that Marilyn had no intention of working for a living. I refused to send her money, but at the time, I still believed my father would recover. However, his condition worsened, and the doctors warned me to prepare for the worst. I longed for Jerry's support, but he rarely visited the hospital, always claiming he was too busy. When he did visit, his only concern was money. "The inheritance must be big, right? Are you and Marilyn splitting it?" His question sickened me. At that moment, I realized the truth. I had married a man who only cared about wealth. My relatives had been right all along. When I called Marilyn to tell her our father's condition was critical, she responded coldly, "Just make sure I keep getting my money. I can't live without it." Then, she hung up. Her selfishness disgusted me, but something else caught my attention, a faint male voice in the background of the call. something felt off. A month later, our father passed away. Marilyn and Jerry were both absent during his final moments. I buried my father, feeling completely alone, yet strangely relieved. Marilyn and Jerry had used me, but their greed would soon lead them down a path of their own making. I had finally learned the truth about those I had once trusted, and I was ready to move on, stronger and wiser than before. I had been through this before, planning a funeral alone, carrying the heavy burden of loss while managing everything by myself. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. My sister didn't come, and my husband offered no support. Once again, I was left to handle everything on my own. On the day of the funeral, my husband showed up briefly, just long enough to be seen. Then he slipped away, claiming he had urgent work. A relative, the very same one who had introduced me to Jerry, noticed his absence and asked, "Where's Jerry? Isn't it strange for the host's husband to be missing?" I forced a small smile and simply said, "He's busy with work, he had to leave." The relative sighed, and I wanted to do the same. The weight of everything was pressing down on me, but I held it together. Later, when the funeral was over, Jerry finally approached me, grinning in a way that made my stomach turn. Instead of comforting me or acknowledging my loss, he got straight to the point. "So, how much did you inherit? Even if you split it, you must have gotten a lot, right?" His eyes gleamed with greed. I wasn't surprised. Relatives had warned me before we got married. They told me Jerry was interested in money, and now their words rang true. My sister had supposedly received $50 million, according to Jerry's guess, and he assumed I had gotten the same amount. In reality, I hadn't even spoken to the lawyer yet. Still in mourning, I watched as my husband spoke excitedly about the inheritance, ignoring the loss I was going through. A bitter laugh escaped me. He didn't even try to hide his priorities. I decided to test him. "I won't inherit anything," I said casually. His reaction was immediate and cruel. "What? You're not getting anything? Then I don't need you. We're getting a divorce." I had already seen this coming. Without hesitation, I looked him in the eye and said, "Let's do it. You married me for my father's money anyway." I pulled out the already prepared divorce papers and placed them in front of him. He blinked, momentarily thrown off by my readiness, but, true to his nature, he signed them without hesitation. As he gathered his things, he threw one last insult over his shoulder. "I'll divorce you, who gets nothing, and marry your sister, Marilyn. She's the one with the $50 million. His words didn't hurt me. If anything, they only confirmed that I had made the right decision. True to his word, Jerry wasted no time pursuing Marilyn. Within days, he began the process of marrying her, believing she held the key to a fortune. Not long after, I received a phone call from him. His voice was filled with excitement, as if he had already won. "Do you still believe that story? When will you handle the inheritance? Hurry up and give Marilyn the $50 million. I had been waiting for this moment, keeping my tone calm and professional. I said, "Let's discuss this at my place next Sunday. I'm preparing for the procedure, and we'll be waiting." Thinking he was about to secure his fortune, Jerry eagerly agreed. On the scheduled day, Jerry and Marilyn arrived at my family home, only to find a lawyer waiting for them. Jerry, still confident, smirked. "Of course, you need a lawyer when inheriting a large sum of money." But the lawyer's expression remained serious as he addressed Jerry. "Before we discuss inheritance, we need to address a compensation claim against you, Jerry, on behalf of Stephanie." He placed several photos on the table, showing Jerry leaving Marilyn's house on multiple occasions before our divorce was finalized. "These serve as evidence of infidelity," the lawyer explained. Jerry's face twisted in shock. He had underestimated me, assuming I had been too preoccupied with the funeral to notice his betrayal, but I had acted quickly, instructing the lawyer to gather proof the moment I overheard him and Marilyn discussing the inheritance over the phone. The meeting suddenly shifted from inheritance matters to the consequences of Jerry's actions. Marilyn sat frozen as Jerry scoffed, trying to brush off the accusation. "Compensation is nothing compared to the $50 million I'm about to get. I'll pay it right now." His arrogance was unbearable. He signed the compensation documents without a second thought, still convinced that the inheritance would make up for it. That's when I decided to deliver the final blow. "Enjoy your life with my sister, who inherited nothing," I said calmly. The color drained from Jerry's face. Marilyn gasped. "What do you mean, nothing? That's impossible." The lawyer clarified the situation. Marilyn was your late mother's stepdaughter, but she was never legally adopted by your father. Therefore, she has no right to inherit any part of his estate. Reality hit Marilyn hard. But I've already spent so much. What will happen to the money Dad used to give me? Stephanie, you have to help me. I looked at her, completely indifferent. You have a husband now. Let Jerry support you. Jerry turned pale. I've already spent money expecting the inheritance, and now I have to pay compensation too. I can't afford to support anyone. Suddenly, his tone changed, becoming desperate. Stephanie, I'm sorry, it was all my fault. Can we start over? His plea was pathetic. I turned away, leaving them to deal with the mess they had created. The two of them had built their future on greed and lies, and now they were left with nothing.